All right. So, hello, everyone. We are really excited to be here with you. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. And today's CBE Catalyst webinar is all about performance assessment, which is a topic very near and dear to our hearts at reDesign. And we'll get into talking about that over the course of the next hour.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vicki Kim, and I am a senior learning designer at reDesign. Um, I've been at reDesign for, gosh, it'll be 8 years next week. And this whole area of performance assessments um, and making learning visible to students is such a um, exciting part of our work. And as Antonia said, we're excited to share it with you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katrina Wenzel. I'm the Director of Learning Design here at reDesign. And performance assessment was actually my introduction to reDesign many years ago when I was a school administrator and I went to a workshop that reDesign led on performance assessments, and it kind of blew my mind. And even as a seasoned educator, just helped me reshape and rethink about what assessment looks like in schools.
All right, and I'm Antonia Rudenstein. I'm the executive director and one of the original co-founders of reDesign. And I think we're going to just jump right in. Okay, so these webinars are part of CBE Catalyst, and I'm just going to take a minute to give you an overview of what CBE Catalyst is in case you are new to this world. We have a lot of new people from around the world, actually, and across the country joining us today. So, CBE Catalyst is an online learning and designing community. It's focused on learner-centered practices and competency-based education as the key uh, i- learning areas and design areas. And it came about because reDesign has for a very long time been consultant to states and districts and schools. We've loved that work. And over the last few years, I really came to feel that we have an equity of access issue with professional learning around learner-centered practices and competency-based education, and that it shouldn't be as hard as it is right now to get grounded in this work and to find what the practices are that one needs to do the work. And so we've built CBE Catalyst as a way to provide much more affordable support to individuals, to small leadership teams or individual leaders and school teams and district teams, and even a state team would be very possible. So the way it's organized as a community is you can see a little picture of it here on my screen. We have learning pathways, each of which are on a key topic. So today's performance assessment is one example of a learning pathway, and we have many others I'll talk about in a second. There's a resource hub which already has over 350 resources, and we are each month adding additional. They're on these key topics, so they are attached to learning pathways, but they can also be accessed just one by one. There's AI-powered tools and sandboxes. There's a community. And then for people who are in a school-based team or a district or state-based team, if that community honors CEUs, then people can also, as they demonstrate competency and become more competent as practitioners, they can earn certificates. So that's the general structure. I'm going to just now show you how it's organized. So what you see here, this image is what we consider a CBE or a learner-centered blueprint. It's all the aspects of a system that begin to shift as you move towards learner-centered practices and competency-based education. And nobody works on all these at the same time. And some people choose to never work on some of these, and that's fine. Like the idea of Catalyst is that people choose what they're working on and what their focus is based on their goals and what their context supports. So at the end of today, we'll give a QR code. You'll be able to explore one of these levers if you want to get a sense of like how we've organized this and what it actually means. And the one that's available is learning experience design. And so you'll get a chance to see what a learning pathway looks like for that. Today is about performance assessment. You can see it's proximate to learning experience design. We see these as very, very adjacent and intertwined often. And so we're going to spend the rest of the hour really digging into that. And part of the reason why it's so exciting to redesign is because in some ways it's the fulcrum that brings together curriculum and assessment. It is actually the place where they can overlap in powerful ways. And so we're going to sort of explore that a bit today as part of our work. All right, so we have three things we're going to focus on today. And unlike many agendas, this is not a 1, 2, 3 agenda. We will be touching on all three of these sort of at the same time. So this is not about how we will spend 15, 20 minutes, but rather we're going to look at how performance assessments can develop these important competencies and skills. We're going to see how these kinds of performance assessments can engage and motivate. And then I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes talking a little bit about why I think, or why reDesign thinks we need to think about performance assessments in really powerful ways in order to meet this moment for career and college readiness. So we're actually going to start with the third bullet as a table setting for the rest of the conversation. All right, so today's session is organized around a set of insights. The first one is what I just said. We have a rapidly changing, very uncertain world. I think that performance assessments are a powerful lever for preparation for it. And it does mean a lot of thinking about what we're doing. I want us today to really focus on the word performance, not as in a play or a concert that I do in front of others in those narrow terms, but as something that has an audience, something I am doing that has an audience out in the world that has meaning and purpose. So we see the purposes of performance assessment in this way. Young people should engage, and adults, in performances in order to learn how to perform well. They are an opportunity to practice performing. They are also quite literally the opportunity to assess one's capacity to perform. And finally, they are an opportunity to reflect on one's performance in order to understand how to improve it for the next time. And for us, all four of these things are really essential, and we can think about, the more we can think about them in this moment, this AI moment and uncertain moment, the more powerful we think this lever is. So we always ask them the question, so what kinds of performances are actually worth learning, practicing, assessing, and reflecting on? Not all performances are created equal. And for us, these are the four things we're looking for when we think about performance assessment design. One, that they develop competencies that have value beyond school walls, that are not purely inside of school wall value. And they are also an opportunity to demonstrate it. So you're developing and demonstrating. The same thing with skills, that these are skills we can apply across many different contexts, not just in a single classroom at a single moment in time. Part of the reason to do performance assessment design in a really strategic way is because it can help develop automaticity around thinking, design, and creative processes. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And then the last thing is really well thought out performance assessments prepare us to undertake tasks that the world is going to ask of us. And right now, there's a lot we don't know about what the world is going to ask of us. But we want to look for high leverage points that will give us that. All right. I'm only going to say a couple of things about this slide. There is a lot on this slide, and it will be shared with you all as a handout at tomorrow or Friday. But the goal here to really think about performance assessment for this moment requires a set of mindset shifts about what assessment is and also what learning is. And you can see this in the top row of this table. And that's the thing I'm going to mostly focus on right now, which is we want to begin shifting from performance assessments as a way to just assess learning at a particular moment in time in a particular single context, like my bio class or my second grade poetry unit or my fifth grade social studies unit on the War of Independence, right? Like that's a one-time single value opportunity to assess versus designing something that has applicability across multiple contexts for learners across time and context. So different academic places outside of school, inside of school, etc. And the reason for this, one, is preparation for the world. The second reason is in order to ensure that young people become the agents of their own learning. We use the word agency all the time in education now. And we mean that in a very, very particular way, which is for students to be able to engage in very rigorous deep learning and design and creation. That would be the agency that we want to make sure they can do across contexts. All right, let's look at some data. This is what informs our thinking and why we get excited, but also have a lot of urgency about this topic. All right, so we know everywhere you read right now, the world of work is changing. Here's a few data points, one of which, so this comes from LinkedIn. Take it for what it is, but they get a lot of data. 60% of Gen Z employees are not making it through their first year of employment. That's a massive number. Let's couple that with this. 8% of managers think Gen Z is ready for work. So that means that as Gen Z goes into the workforce, 92% of managers are predisposed to think that the people they have hired are not ready for this job. The World Economic Forum is predicting that by 2030, there will be a net increase of 78 million new jobs. That should be cause for some celebration, except they are also saying that 39% of existing skills will be outdated. And if we put that together with the two previous slides, what we're saying is we are already sending young people into the workforce who are not surviving their first year of work, and their managers do not think they're ready. And by 2030, the skills they have that are not helping them in their first year, 39% of them will be outdated. So we are really in a moment, for me, this makes me anxious on behalf of young people, where the mismatch between what they can do when they are leaving education and what quite literally people are predicting they will need to be able to do is vast. What's growing and what's declining? There's going to be a net increase. We love that. What does it mean? It means what they're calling innovative, or what Burning Glass Institute calls innovative thinking jobs. Jobs that are all about flexible, adaptable thinking across contexts in lots of different situations and quite rapidly, right? The jobs that are decreasing are the ones that are rules-based and logic-based. If you use ChatGPT or another LLM or other AI tools, you see that easily, right? It can do those kinds of tools much better and faster than us. A lot of the tasks we ask of young people are fit into this declining fast set of skills. All right, now let's look at post-secondary. There are quite a few people from universities in this session. There are people who are working on workforce development, so we want to look at the whole story here. All right, so young people. The data here is also, not awesome, I might say. So a few years ago, it's a bit dated now, we were able to do a kind of anecdotal study. We looked at college syllabi across a number of colleges, not enough to say this is a really sound research study, but enough to feel like, okay, we get an idea of this. And what we found is whether you go to MIT or University of Michigan or a small community college in Ohio, it's actually a relatively stable kind of set of things we ask young people to do. Position papers, presentations, research papers. If you know somebody, if you have a young person who's in college or recently graduated, this is probably still relatively familiar. This is what my daughter is doing right now in her senior year at a pretty select university. And many people I know have said, yep, this is what it is. This is what we're asking young people to do. I want you to take a look at it and think about it for a minute. One of the things you can see here is a lot of these tasks rely on the kind of Western European logic flow that has been so prioritized in our country in education. And those are the things, as you saw, that ChatGPT and other large language models can do very well. And you can see that if you read anything from people in college, they're all like, the kids are cheating all the time. We can't figure out how to control it, right? That's because the things we're asking of young people are the things that are declining fast in terms of value in the real world. So it's not kids cheating. And so, I mean, one way to think of it is kids are figuring out how to do the things easily that have low value in the real world. All right, let's look at two more data points. There was the Walton family in Gallup did a study, a survey, I think last year. 24% of Gen Zers said they felt very prepared for college. The number jumps up if you add, somewhat prepared, but very prepared is what most students should say. And we're far away from that. I think they have a right to feel like they're not prepared for college. Look at these numbers. So the first thing I want you to notice is the dates. These are pre-COVID numbers, and they are very close together. So we're looking at data between 2015 and 2020, and we're looking at the percent increase of remedial course taking. So that is students who are not able to do that list of tasks I just showed you. They need to go into remedial classes because they cannot do those tasks. They're not ready for those tasks. So that number quadrupled in a 5-year period, pre-COVID. So there is something that is happening in the school system that is really not working for young people. I'm very eager for more recent data to come out. This is from NCAS. Presumably they will have data in the next year or two.
So one of our other insights is taking all of that and thinking about what this all means, right? So developing transferable skill sets or competencies have always mattered. However, with the reality of today's world, both inside and outside of the classroom, represented by some of that information that Antonia just shared, they may matter more than ever. And the research is pretty consistent in recognizing how those competencies or skill sets develop in learning environments, and it's through performance assessment. So performance assessments, strong ones, again, to reiterate what Antonia said earlier, ask learners to learn what it looks like and means to perform something well, to practice the thinking and work of that performance, to be able to assess their ability to do that performance, and to reflect and then understand what it looks like to improve and what their next steps might be. Strong performance assessments aren't about recalling facts, right? They center on real problems or needs or goals that matter to learners and their communities. They're built for authentic audiences, not just a teacher in their grade book. They ask learners to use what they know and can do, to think like practitioners applying content, disciplinary skills, and transferable skills together. Strong performance assessments don't rely on a single dominant narrative. They invite learners, cultures, experiences, backgrounds, full identities into the work. Because when students can connect who they are to what they are learning, their insights deepen and their learning becomes more authentic. And finally, these assessments mirror the thinking and practices of people who actually do this work, writers, scientists, designers, activists. And these assessments are things like proposals, multimedia presentations, engineering design, and event planning and organizing. But it's not just those four, right? There's an indefinite number of performance assessments that can be designed well in a classroom or in another learning environment. For instance, here are 100 that we've named across different areas and disciplines. And what makes all of those 100 plus whichever ones you might be thinking of different from traditional tests is that when designed to be a true performance assessment and not just an assigned final product, they move us from assessment of learning, that bottom left corner there, which only captures what a student knows in a moment. And in that moment, as in probably temporarily, to assessment and performance as learning. They exist in that upper right corner. They require high complexity and rigor. They use the entirety of Bloom's taxonomy, demanding knowledge and understanding of content to drive the application of both disciplinary and transferable skill sets, which again are core competencies in higher order thinking ways. And before I hand this off to Vicki, who's going to delve into performance assessment structure, I think it's worth pausing to acknowledge both the excitement and concern around generative and agentic AI, especially the fear that it might replace the kind of thinking we want learners to do, right? But AI has already begun to become deeply woven into our world. And rather than ignoring it, we know that we need to teach learners how to work with it while also elevating the essential parts of learning that are uniquely human. And so this chart from Burning Glass Institute shows that many entry-level job skills now overlap with AI capabilities. And you'll note where those yellow bars extend past the orange ones, beginning with business operations there. These are the tasks where AI can support but not replace us. These are the spaces where competency-based transferable skills matter most. This is inquiry and communication and quantitative reasoning and working with others. And performance assessments are ideal for developing these skills, but they are also ideal for helping learners practice how to use AI to augment, not replace their work.
Okay, insight number 5. Projects and tasks have a hidden structure automatically used by experts when they create high-quality products. Let's start off with an analogy. Have you ever tried to hang something heavy on a wall? Something so heavy that it requires that you secure it to the stud behind the wall? So imagine that your handy person is on vacation, your stud finder is out of batteries. What do you do? You've heard that maybe you can tap on the wall and listen for a change in pitch or use a heavy magnet to locate screws. And these are clever workarounds, but what if there were a pattern behind the wall? What if there were an underlying structure that we could learn so that we could independently find a stud whenever we needed. Well, the pattern is 16 inches on center. You can ask any builder or contractor. A typical building frame in the US is constructed such that every 16 inches you'll find a stud. You measure from the end of a wall 16 inches out, 32 inches, 48 inches, and your nail will hit wood. So this is like performance task design. And rather than just assigning an essay, let's say a persuasive essay, and providing a rubric for the final product, we could break down the process of creating the essay so that the skills, like the studs, are visible. And in both cases, finding a stud or writing the essay, understanding that internal structure gives us the ability to make informed decisions, to act with purpose, and to use what we're learning to tackle other new challenges. Okay, unpacking the hidden structures gives students the tools to perform at high levels. This is one of our charges as educators, making the underlying structure visible, helping learners to recognize and learn about the hidden cognitive and metacognitive processes. When we do this, when we make internal structures visible and we explicitly support developing competency in these processes, it empowers students to take learning risks and to do and create so much more than they maybe thought they could. So here we have a few college and career ready assessments: persuasive essay, infographic, and speech. How might students tackle these tasks? So maybe for the persuasive essay, they would think, oh, I have to write a 5-paragraph essay on the topic my teacher gave me. I'm going to need an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, a conclusion. Likely they'll think about the format and the content, and not necessarily the skills or the processes needed. So, as part of that freshman college workload study that Antonia talked about, aside from looking at different kinds of tasks, we also wondered if there was a pattern to be found beneath those different types of tasks. Is there any underlying structure that's consistent among them? So if you look at these, what trends are you noticing across these 3 seemingly different tasks? Well, we found that, and you can see that across a wide variety of tasks, there are similar cognitive processes that are essential to successfully and independently completing that task. They're the processes that experts use automatically when they create their high quality products. These thinking processes, we call them thinking blocks. They'll look familiar as they're some of the most recurring cognitive moves that trend across various types of products. So if a student learns the thinking processes for writing a persuasive essay, they'll use almost all of those, again, for creating an infographic, and then most of those again for speech, and even for creating, more different types of tasks like designing inventions or creating presentations. In this slide, we'll see that we're looking at some STEM and inquiry-focused performance assessments. And here you can see that there are many of the same recurring tasks that were in the other projects that we just looked at. These are also good examples of how thinking blocks can be adapted depending on the context. For example, for a research paper, a student conducts research and analyzes the findings, whereas in a mathematical model, that research involves implementing the model to collect data. So while the language of the process may look different across tasks, the logic of that thinking process remains the same, research.
Can you go back 1 second, Trina? Can I just say one additional point on this? So if you're thinking about this moment, the current AI moment and the current moment of preparing young people for their future, whether it's post-secondary learning or the workforce, if the magic here is if we could teach young people the thinking blocks, they could apply them to any context. They could apply them with the support of AI tools or on their own, but they understand this, what is generally a hidden process. So it gives them, when I said earlier, agency and like true ownership of their learning. If these become the automatic thinking blocks in their brain that they don't have to pull out a piece of paper and say, what do I do first? What's my second? I did this in biology. Now I have to do something totally different in social studies or in my internship. If that becomes automatic, then they can learn anything anywhere. Like as AI changes what jobs are, as skills change, as requirements of post-secondary shift in ways that we don't know or understand, at least I hope they will shift, then these become automatic touchstones in the brain that do not require the cognitive load that so much of the work we give students requires. So this just becomes how they approach the world, how they think about what they're making and creating and producing for all the different contexts that they're part of.
Okay, this takes us to insight number 6. The creative pathway of any project or task has stable stages. Not only are those discrete skills and processes or thinking blocks hidden, but the flow of how they're best tackled is also hidden. There are several approaches to the creative process. Some of the more better known ones are like, design cycle or design thinking process. And I'm going to walk you through really quickly our approach to designing engaging competency-based performance assessments using a flexibly structured creative process that makes visible a pathway to the final product and builds the skills and strategies that are needed to get there. This is this Nautilus image is our creative pathway, and it's a visual framework that reflects, the concepts that are in like a design cycle, but it's specifically grounded in the learning sciences and in child and youth development research. And we created it to support designing competency-based, agency-building learning experiences. And by using this stable structure, learners can build familiarity and so that they can more easily self-navigate through performance assessments and projects. Okay, so with the thinking blocks here that are mapped to the creative pathway, we can literally make learning visible to learners. They can understand and see that to launch the work, you first need to set the direction for the project. What's the issue? Who am I creating this for? What do I need to know? And with that direction, you can effectively gather information and synthesize it to form your own ideas. And then you can move into creating your product and refining your ideas to communicate them and to impact your audience. And it's rather than students waiting and relying on instructions, With this visible structure, learners can visualize the journey ahead. They can locate themselves on that pathway. They can continuously self-assess and make meaningful decisions about how to move their own learning process. Okay, I really like the term architecture to describe our approach to designing embedded performance assessments. It describes a visible design and structure that articulates the building blocks of thinking and creating, and it places them in a stable pathway. This structure cycles repeatedly across projects, making that learning and doing visible and usable. And it builds schema or a mental framework for students to carry out their work until they internalize it and it becomes a habit. So here you can see each thinking block moves students closer to the end product or to creating the final task and making an impact. So when we use this architecture to design performance assessments and we partner it with CBE instructional practices, students are doing authentic work, creating products along the pathway so that they aren't turning something in at the end that has structural issues, but they can deliver a quality project that they feel good about. So creating these kinds of learning experiences for learners is an equity move. Okay, a final note on thinking blocks. Thinking blocks are modular and they can be flexibly grouped and adapted. Teachers can develop their strategy for managing time and cognitive load by selecting and arranging thinking blocks to fit a variety of learning needs and different scenarios. We have two examples here. This first one shows the articulated full set of thinking processes that go into creating a persuasive essay. But we know that context matters. So you can see in the right-hand column how the structure can be adapted to attend to time constraints and learners' needs. Here, a teacher might make the strategic move to provide the topic of the essay. They also might decide to curate materials for the research process in advance, but to honor the transparency and to still build metacognition, the teacher can make sure to surface the process of selecting a topic and maybe provide the criteria they use to assess the credibility of those pre-selected resources. So they're still making those thinking blocks visible, even though they're not directly teaching and working with them. And the second example.
Can you go back one more second? So regardless of what you teach in your context, you could be in college, you could be in a community college, you could be in the military preparing young people for some aspect of their work. You could be second grade's harder, but all the way down at least to fourth grade. You could have something you want students to be able to persuade people to do. These thinking blocks can adapt to all of those contexts. So either all of them, or as Vicky's showing here, like you have time constraints or you're organizing in certain specific ways. Like students who are 5 can generate questions. They're not the same questions as somebody who's a senior in college. That doesn't matter. We're teaching them the process of generating questions. If they already do it naturally when they're 5. We want to make sure they keep doing it all the way through. Building that into part of the process ensures that by the time they go to whatever they're doing after high school, they can ask questions like nobody's business. The same thing with research, right? Fourth graders can look at different things and figure out what they think is important or what moves them or what they can connect to in their own personal experience. they can formulate a claim. They might not use that language in fourth grade, although they could, but they can do it. And then if we make that visible to them, they can do it the rest of their lives in lots of different ways. So the goal is to begin thinking adaptively about the power of using, starting even with the youngest children through a system of developing these skills. If they can do these things by the time they go to college, they will not be in remedial math and writing and reading.
Okay, there's one more example that's within a math modeling project. And you can see a similar strategic moves. Here, the teacher decides maybe to simplify the project and the final product. Maybe she provides the scenario that defines the variables and assumptions and focuses the student work on planning and testing a model that leads to a short written and graphical justification of the solution.
Mm.
This is giving learners focused practice working with the content, as well as representing and communicating information mathematically. And it'll serve them when they eventually go to create a full report of their mathematical model in a competition or to tackle a community problem. Lastly, we want to show you that we've designed a way to evaluate the quality of performance assessments for rigor, relevance, and agency. This checklist is less a rigid set of criteria and more a set of criteria to inform, inspire, and assess your approach to designing performance assessments. Many teachers we've worked with over the years have found it super useful, and we'll make sure to share the link with you after this webinar.
You're muted, Antonia.
All right. Let's, I believe this is our final insight. So I started to talk about this a minute ago. There's a power in mapping backwards to ensure students have enough opportunities to develop automaticity and competency. So we're going to take a minute and zoom out from the actual design and look at what happens when you start stacking performance assessments over time. All right, this is a high school example, but it could easily be done for a whole system going all the way back to kindergarten. So in a year-long course in high school, let's imagine students do at least one performance assessment each quarter, and maybe they do two. But a minimum of 4 in a year. Well, if they take 5 courses in a year, and we know in high school students often take more, they will have done 20 to 40 performance assessments in that year. That's a lot of good practice. And over 4 years, they will have done between 80 and 160 performance assessments in high school. That is a lot of good practice. And so we want to begin, and that's just 4 years. So if you ramp that all the way back to kindergarten or 4th grade, wherever you wanted to start, that it would be substantial practice for the kinds of things that the real world will be asking for. If there are, and then below you can see, if it's 80 to 160 performance assessments in 4 years of high school, then the total of performance tasks where did that number come from?
I think that's about products that they would complete.
Oh yeah, if there's, sorry, thank you. I misread it. So often within a performance assessment, there's 1 or 2 products. And if they're doing 80 to 160 performance assessments, but they're doing both, let's say they're giving a speech, but they need to write the speech and practice it written down, 2 products, right? The speech and the written, or they need to be in Socratic seminars in order to talk about the things that they will ultimately turn into a speech. That you get to 1 or 2 products in the course of a performance assessment, then they get to over 200 in a year, in 4 years. that you can start to see how that could gather some momentum and automaticity in the brain. Let's take a look at it visually. So this is organized with 5 courses across 4 years. And this is a pretend one, but we've done this many times with systems. What you can see across the very top is the task that I showed you about post-secondary, what college is asking of young people, and the numbers. So 12 persuasive writing, 12 expository writing, etc. Underneath that, is how you get to the total number of opportunities to prepare for college. And you can see in the far left column, there's a total of about 143 tasks in the first year of college. Over the course of high school, we could get to 232 tasks. That's good practice for being ready to do what's asked in college. I want to show you how we built this because one of the things about competency-based education is it requires coordination across disciplines and grade levels. Or if you don't have disciplines, if you have interdisciplinary teams, even so, people need to begin making visible to each other what kinds of performance assessments they are doing with young people. And then organizing and coordinating, oops, if you can go back for a minute, organizing and coordinating the tasks so that this left-hand column, number of tasks, shows relative parity between different disciplines. So we don't any longer say English handles writing because it's not enough practice if English does all the writing. You'll never get to 200 tasks if English has to be the main place where writing is handled. So you begin seeing like English is going to hone in on a few kinds of writing tasks in 9th grade and a few in 10th grade and 11th, but other people will be handling persuasive writing as well, global history in 9th grade, earth science and global history in 10th grade. Like the numbers of opportunities to practice persuasive writing stacks over time, but only if it's shared across disciplines or across departments or teams, whatever your structure is. That's true for math. Can you see on that slide? Yeah. That's true for math. That's true. So there's a few other things to notice here. What we recommended to this imaginary school is that not everybody try and teach everything, that departments or teams start focusing in on certain things. It allows the teachers to maximize their time and minimize their cognitive load, right? At a time when they've got too many things to do. They get really good at persuasive writing, or they get really good at engineering design, and they find really powerful ways to do that with young people. So that's one thing, is hone in as departments, make very strategic decisions about what could be taught and focused on. The other thing is to begin making distinctions between what students will get a lot of practice in and what they will get a little bit of practice in. So if you look at grade 9 engineering design, they're just getting a few little touches, not enough to assess their competency, but enough to get introduced. It's the beginning of practice. It won't necessarily, some students may be great after 3 opportunities, but we don't want to set students up for failure and say, you should be good at this after 3 opportunities. On the other hand, expository writing, students have had 11 opportunities in this imaginary school, and they've had 28 opportunities with Socratic seminar. The connection between what they're talking about and what they're starting to write about can start becoming powerful. Then if I look across at the colors, the dark orange is where we think students have had quite a bit of practice, and the light orange is where they have not yet had enough practice. So as you stack these up, even though in 12th grade they will only do 2 research papers, they will have also had 2 in 10th grade and 2 in 11th grade. They will be at 6 by the time they're seniors. That's a nice, it's not a huge amount of research papers, but it's a good amount. So the goal becomes like thinking in really careful ways. And we always say to people, start with what you're already doing. Don't build a whole new map from scratch. Start with the assessment, the performance assessments you've already got going on. Small or big, it doesn't matter. Build a map for those and then begin having conversations about, oh, I could do more of this. I notice I lean more into this. I'm not as good at that. Start to have conversations. Now, the other thing to notice here is that each one of these performance tasks has the thinking blocks in them. Inherently, it does. We may not make it visible to students yet, but we could begin making that visible. So then students can start seeing, look how much practice they're going to get to in this imaginary school, 232 opportunities maybe to research or to choose a topic or generate questions or reflect on their practice. That begins getting them doing worthwhile tasks that they can reflect on to improve in order to do better. The next step of all this is to map all of these to a creative process. Here's our creative pathway, but you may have a design cycle that you use or something you prefer. And then to map, so this is the mapping of the thinking blocks, so that you can begin seeing how many different opportunities they will have to practice each thinking block. The next one, which we don't have a slide on, but which we often do with people, is then each one of these gets mapped to competencies. And those then become the ways that you can keep track of how the young people are demonstrating and developing their competency.
So a little bit to close out here is when you have created a performance assessment and you have the thinking blocks you're going to use, eventually there is some end product, right, that learners are sharing that represent their skill development over the process of this performance assessment. We believe pretty firmly that the way that you assess that and that you are assessing this skill development is through proficiency developmental rubrics, and that it be based on your competency framework if you have one. So we do have a bot that we've shared, I'm sure we'll share it again, that we created to help you build these very specific kinds of rubrics with a low cognitive load for the adults to do so. But I think one of the things that I love most about a strong performance assessment, and Vicki brought this up earlier, is that when you don't just make it about that final product, which again, remember, if that's all it is, you're assigned the paper, you're given the criteria to write it in a due date. What you're assessing when the student turns in that paper is you're assessing what they know and have shown, but it is not assessment for learning or as learning. It is just of learning. And a strong performance assessment where it's broken down here allows that learners are being driven towards success, right? Because at every moment, they're getting a check-in point that is assessing and giving feedback about where they are in this journey and what they're able to do and whether they need to pause and stop to get to that successful final product. And again, each of these pieces, each of these thinking blocks and formative assessments along the way can be tied to skill development. In this case, explore an issue here is tied to engaging in critiquing perspectives in the Future 9. And you do not have to do this alone, and you can absolutely do this. We promise. I know there was a lot today. One of the things that we prioritize in Catalyst in our learning pathways is that they're not just about the learning, although there is a lot of learning you can do. We just shared a lot of information with you today, and it's the tip of the iceberg. So a learning pathway allows you to go as deep as you want to go in that learning and understanding. If you're a leader, it also provides you with tools to bring that learning to your faculty. But it also gives you a lot of tools. So for instance, in the learning pathway for performance assessment, guess what? You get a whole bunch of learning assessments, performance assessments that reDesign has created, full performance assessments ready to go, built on the thinking block structure for you to adapt or adopt as you wish. We also have tip sheets for each of the thinking blocks with links to formative tasks and tools to support. We have a bot in which you can put in your existing performance assessment or project and get feedback to see where it aligns with criteria, what you might change. And so there's a lot to support you.
All right, so I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, if you want to get a sense of how a learning pathway is structured, we do have this QR code will take you into learning experience design, and you can muck around and see what's there and download something if it's interesting to you, and just get a sense, explore, and give us feedback if you have it. We are really working hard to be very responsive and to feedback and suggestions from people. If you want to try a membership or you want to talk more about that, there's a QR code to get into my calendar. I'd love to talk with you. And there's a QR code for looking at memberships. The individual membership is $96 for a year with all the learning pathways. There's an accelerator for schools, and then there's a small leader sprint. So there's lots of different ways people can join. And if any of these feel like it would fit, we would love to talk with you about it. Each month, CBE Catalyst has a newsletter. I think quite a few of you already receive it. The newsletter lines up with the webinar. So this month's theme is performance assessment. The next one I think is on grading. There's one on advancement and crediting coming up. So each month when we do a webinar, we follow it up with some new and additional resources and tidbits in a newsletter. So if that's interesting, you can jump in that way. Now, any thoughts, questions, reactions, wonderings? We know we're right up against the hour, but we'd love to hear your thoughts if you have any.
All right. Well, we'll be here for a couple more minutes, but thank you for attending, and we hope this was helpful. And as shared, you'll get a follow-up email in the next day or two that has the recording and some tidbits for you for fun.
Oh, can you go back to the screen? Can you share the, oh yeah, you're getting it. It's coming. Hi, Julie. Upward pressure that encourages colleges and universities to design more authentic assessments. So if you're at all active on LinkedIn, I don't, there are quite a few people who are writing in very, very urgent terms about the need for higher ed to redesign itself so that it's not obsolete. A lot of them are quite informed. It's hard to know, especially in the age of AI, they're writing specifically in that context. It's hard, I think, because there is so much questioning about the value of college. There is pressure. I don't know if it's upward pressure or if it's just pressure. But it's hard to know if it'll make a difference. They're big institutions that move slowly, and AI is moving fast.
I wasn't sure what slide you wanted me to go to.
The one about connecting to me, the calendar. Or ways to join. Yeah, that one. Thank you. And we'll send that in the follow-up email. Okay, great.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.